They think about you so much, it's becoming unbearable, and it doesn't happen in some dramatic movie scene way. It happens quietly. It happens in the smallest, most inconvenient moments. It happens when they're driving and suddenly miss a turn because their mind drifted. It happens when they're staring at their phone with no notification there. It happens when the world finally goes quiet and there's nothing left to distract them from the one thought they keep trying to outrun. You, not as a memory they can neatly box up, but as a presence that keeps showing up uninvited. They don't plan to think about you. That's the worst part. It just happens. One second they're fine. The next second something in their chest tightens, and they don't even know why at first. Then it hits them. That familiar feeling. That familiar pull. That awareness that you're still somewhere inside them, living rent-free, louder than ever. And what makes it unbearable isn't just that they think about you. It's that they don't know what to do with the thoughts once they arrive. They can't talk about them. They can't act on them. They can't fully shut them down either. So they sit there trapped between wanting relief and wanting control, replaying the same internal loop that never really ends. They probably assume distance would fix this. Most people do. There's this belief that if you create enough space, feelings naturally fade, that silence erases attachment, that time smooths everything out. But for some people, distance doesn't make things quieter. It makes them louder. When you were present, there were interactions, routines, moments that gave their emotions somewhere to land. When you're gone, all of that energy has nowhere to go. So it turns inward. And suddenly, instead of experiencing you in real time, they experience you through memory, imagination, and unanswered questions. Distance didn't make you smaller in their mind. It removed the distractions that kept them from noticing how much you mattered. Every unspoken word, every unresolved moment, every emotion that was pushed aside while you were still there, now comes back with interest. Silence doesn't bring peace when something meaningful was left unfinished. Silence amplifies, and now you're not just someone from the past. You're a recurring thought they didn't schedule, didn't approve, and can't cancel. What really keeps you stuck in their head isn't just who you were to them. It's what never got processed. The mind hates unfinished stories. It hates emotional loose ends. And what they replay isn't always the big moments. It's the tiny ones. The tone of a sentence, a look that lingered a second too long, a conversation that almost went somewhere deeper, but didn't. Their brain keeps going back, trying to solve something that doesn't have a clear answer. They're not reliving the past because they want to. They're reliving it because their nervous system never got closure, and the heart doesn't move on just because the situation ended. Especially not when feelings were delayed, minimized, or ignored at the time. So now, instead of feeling things naturally when you were there, they're feeling them all at once in your absence. That's why the thoughts feel intrusive. That's why they show up at the worst times. It's emotional backlog finally demanding attention. The more they try to control it, the worse it gets. People who rely on emotional control don't handle loss the same way others do. When feelings start surfacing unexpectedly, it feels like losing power. And instead of leaning into the discomfort, their instinct is to suppress it. Push it down, stay busy, stay logical, stay detached. But emotions don't disappear just because they're ignored. They wait, and when control slips even slightly, they rush in. That's when thinking about you turns into something heavier, something obsessive, something they don't recognize themselves in. They might catch themselves wondering why a single thought of you can throw off their entire mood, why one memory can ruin an otherwise good day, why they feel irritated with themselves for still caring. That irritation is important. It means the feelings are strong enough to threaten the version of themselves they're trying to maintain. And instead of letting go, they tighten their grip, which only makes the pressure build. You're not just a memory to them. You're a trigger. Their body reacts before their mind has time to intervene. A certain song plays and their chest feels heavy. A familiar situation happens and something feels missing. Even a calm moment can suddenly feel uncomfortable, like something important should be there but isn't. That's because attachment isn't stored only in thoughts. It's stored in the nervous system, in patterns of safety, excitement, connection. Your presence became associated with a specific emotional state, and now that state has no outlet, so it looks for you over and over again. This isn't nostalgia, it's conditioning. Their body remembers what their mind is trying to forget, and that's why thinking about you doesn't feel optional. It feels automatic. What's strange is that they don't always think about you when they're sad. They think about you when things are quiet, when life slows down, when there's no crisis demanding attention. That's when you surface the most. Because calm doesn't distract, peace doesn't numb. In stillness, whatever hasn't been dealt with rises to the top. They might even catch themselves thinking, why now? Everything seems fine on the surface. But that's exactly the problem. When there's nothing else to focus on, the truth sneaks in. And the truth is, they never fully let themselves feel what losing you meant. They postponed it, and now the bill is due. There's also guilt mixed into all of this. Guilt for missing you. Guilt for thinking about you when they believe they shouldn't. Guilt for wondering about you instead of fully committing to moving on. And they might criticize themselves internally, telling themselves they're weak or stuck or foolish for still caring. That self-judgment doesn't erase the feeling. It just adds another layer of pain on top of it. Now they're not only missing you, they're ashamed of missing you. And shame makes people go quiet. It makes them hide. It keeps them from reaching out even when the desire is strong. So instead of expressing the feeling, they internalize it. And internalized emotions don't fade. They intensify. They may not even realize how often they compare others to you. It's not a conscious checklist. It's a subtle sense of something being off. Conversations that don't flow the same way. Connections that feel flatter. Laughter that doesn't hit as deeply. And instead of thinking, I miss you, their mind reframes it as, I just haven't met the right person yet. But the comparison is still happening beneath the surface. You set a baseline they didn't expect to carry with them, and every interaction that doesn't meet it quietly reminds them of you. That reminder isn't romanticized. It's frustrating. It makes them question their own choices. It makes them wonder if they misjudged what they had. And that questioning keeps the cycle alive. The reason they'll probably never admit how much you're in their head is simple. Admitting it would mean admitting vulnerability. It would mean acknowledging that something affected them deeply, that they didn't have as much control as they thought, that walking away didn't actually solve everything. For someone who values emotional self-sufficiency, that's terrifying. So they keep it hidden. They act indifferent. They convince others they are fine. They might even convince themselves most days. But at night or in quiet moments, or when something unexpected reminds them of you, the truth shows up again, loud, persistent, unignorable. And the hardest realization for them comes slowly. It's not a sudden breakdown, it's a creeping awareness. The understanding that you never really left their internal world, that even without contact, without updates, without presence, you're still there, still influencing their mood, still shaping their thoughts, still creating a tension they don't know how to release. That's when thinking about you stops feeling bittersweet and starts feeling unbearable. Because now they know it's not going away on its own. And they're faced with a choice they've been avoiding from the start. Feel it, or keep carrying it. And this is where things start to turn inward in a way they didn't expect. Because once they realize you never really left, their mind doesn't just replay memories anymore. It starts arguing with itself. One part of them wants relief. It wants peace. It wants the noise to stop. The other part wants control. It wants to stay composed, distant, unaffected. These two sides don't compromise. They clash. Every day, every quiet moment becomes a negotiation. Should they reach out or stay silent? Should they acknowledge the feeling or bury it again? And the exhausting part isn't the missing itself, it's the constant decision making around it. The emotional tug of war drains them. They wake up tired even when they slept. They feel restless without knowing why. They're not falling apart, but they're not settled either. And the longer this internal conflict goes on, the more unbearable the thoughts of you become. Not because you did anything wrong, but because unresolved emotions don't stay neutral. They demand resolution. Time was supposed to help. That's what they told themselves. Just give it time. Time heals. Time creates distance. Time makes things blurry. Except that isn't what's happening. Time is making things clearer, sharper, more defined. Instead of fading, the feeling is crystallizing into something they can no longer ignore. Because time doesn't heal what was avoided, it only exposes it. Each passing week becomes another reminder that they haven't actually dealt with what losing you meant. They may have moved forward on the surface. New routines, new habits, new faces. But emotionally, they're still standing at the same closed door, wondering what would happen if they knocked, and the realization that time isn't fixing this. That's unsettling. It makes them question their own coping mechanisms. It makes them wonder if they misjudged their ability to detach. And that self-doubt feeds right back into thinking about you. At some point, curiosity sneaks in. Not the innocent kind, the anxious kind. They start wondering where you are now, what your life looks like without them, whether you've moved on or if they still cross your mind too. This curiosity isn't about information, it's about reassurance. They're looking for proof that the connection meant something on both sides, and the silence doesn't give them answers. Silence lets the imagination run wild, and imagination is rarely kind. They might picture you happy, thriving, surrounded by people who appreciate you more than they ever did, or worse, they picture you forgetting them completely. That uncertainty hurts more than knowing the truth ever could, because at least the truth has edges. Uncertainty just stretches on forever. And somewhere along the way, a quieter fear takes root, the fear that you're better off without them. This isn't jealousy yet, it's something heavier. It's the idea that losing you wasn't just unfortunate, it was deserved. That maybe they weren't enough. Maybe they hesitated too much. Maybe they didn't show up in the way they should have. This is where missing you stops being about longing and starts being about self-evaluation. They don't just think about you, they think about who they were with you, what version of themselves they showed, what they held back, and regret starts whispering. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to keep them awake at night. Reaching out crosses their mind more often than they'd ever admit, but the idea feels risky, vulnerable, exposing. Contact would mean acknowledging the weight of what they feel. It would mean opening the door to rejection, or worse, indifference. Staying silent feels safer. Silence hurts, but it's familiar. It doesn't threaten their sense of control, so they choose the pain they know over the risk they don't. And every time they choose silence, the pressure builds, because unexpressed emotion doesn't dissolve. It accumulates. Each unsent message, each imagined conversation, each moment they stop themselves from acting adds another layer to the weight they're carrying. They start playing scenarios in their head, not because they expect them to happen, but because imagining feels like relief. A conversation where everything is finally said, a moment where tension dissolves, an apology, an explanation, a reunion. These fantasies aren't about outcome, they're about emotional regulation. Their mind is trying to give them what reality isn't: closure, comfort, understanding. And even though they know it's just imagination, it feels real enough to soothe the ache for a moment. Then the moment passes, and the ache returns stronger than before. This is when jealousy quietly enters the picture. Not dramatic, not possessive, not outwardly expressed, just a subtle sting when they imagine you being chosen, when they picture someone else getting the version of you they once had access to. They don't feel entitled to you anymore, and that's what makes it worse. They don't think they have the right to feel jealous. So they don't label it as jealousy. They call it curiosity or concern or nothing at all. But the feeling is there, and it tightens every time they think about the possibility of you moving on without looking back. Eventually, thinking about you stops coming in waves and starts feeling constant. You're no longer a sharp pain that flares up occasionally. You're background noise, a low hum that never fully goes away. They can function, they can laugh, they can engage with life. But underneath it all, there's this quiet awareness of something unresolved, something unfinished. You become part of their internal landscape, not dramatic, just persistent. And that persistence is what makes it unbearable, because there's no obvious action to take, no clear resolution, just a feeling that refuses to be ignored. And here's the part that matters for you. Even if they never say it out loud, none of this is happening because you chased them, or begged, or demanded attention. This isn't about effort, it's about impact. You left an emotional imprint they weren't prepared for. You mattered in a way that slipped past their defenses. And once something gets past those defenses, it doesn't leave quietly. It stays, it echoes, it waits until they're ready to face it. Or until it wears them down enough that avoiding it is no longer an option. They might keep pretending they're fine. They might keep telling themselves they made the right decision. But deep down, there's a truth they can't escape forever. You're unbearable to think about because you were never fully felt. And until they allow themselves to feel it, you'll stay right there. In their mind, in their body, in the spaces they thought were finally empty. And now something subtle but powerful starts happening inside them. The internal debate they've been having doesn't stay neutral anymore. It turns emotional. One side of them starts getting louder, more impatient, more desperate for relief. The other side digs in harder, tightening control, refusing to budge. This isn't just indecision anymore. It's exhaustion. They're tired of carrying the feeling, tired of pretending it doesn't matter, tired of waking up with the same thoughts sitting quietly in the back of their mind, waiting for attention. The inner dialogue becomes relentless. One moment they convince themselves they're over it, that they've moved on, that thinking about you doesn't mean anything. The next moment, a single trigger dismantles that entire narrative. And every time that happens, it chips away at their confidence. They start doubting their own emotional awareness. If they were truly fine, why does one memory still have this much power? Why does one thought still derail their focus? Why does your absence still feel so present? This is where the discomfort deepens, because now it's not just about missing you, it's about the fear that something is wrong with them. That maybe they're broken, maybe they're stuck, maybe they don't process loss the way others do. They watch people around them move on, adapt, detach, and they wonder why their own internal world feels frozen in time. And the truth they don't want to face is simple, but painful. They didn't allow themselves to feel when it mattered. They postponed it, they delayed it, they intellectualized it, and now the emotional weight has nowhere left to go except inward. That's why thinking about you feels heavier now than it ever did when you were still around. They keep waiting for a day when they'll wake up and feel lighter. A day when your name doesn't immediately stir something in their chest. A day when the memories feel neutral instead of loaded. But that day doesn't come, not because they're incapable of healing, but because healing requires engagement. It requires presence. It requires sitting with discomfort instead of dodging it. Time alone doesn't do the work. Time only gives space for the work to happen, and they haven't done it yet. So instead of healing, time becomes a mirror. It shows them exactly what they've been avoiding, and the longer it goes on, the more unsettling it feels, because now they can't even blame the intensity on freshness. Enough time has passed that the feeling should have faded. The fact that it hasn't forces a confrontation they're not ready for. And then comes the moment where they start wondering about you in ways that scare them. Not just how you're doing, but who you're becoming without them. They imagine you adapting, evolving, finding your rhythm again. They picture you laughing freely, moving through life with ease, no longer weighed down by whatever held you back before. And instead of comfort, this image creates a tightness in their chest. Because if you're doing well without them, what does that say about their place in your life? Were they replaceable? Were they just a chapter? Or worse, were they the one who slowed you down? These questions don't come from arrogance. They come from insecurity, from the fear that their absence didn't leave the mark they hoped it did. And that fear feeds the obsession, because the mind tries to regain significance when it feels threatened. That's when self-blame starts sneaking in quietly. They replay moments where they could have shown up more, spoken up sooner, stayed present instead of pulling away. They question decisions that once felt logical and necessary. And the painful part isn't just the regret, it's the uncertainty. They don't know if things would have turned out differently. They don't know if the outcome was inevitable. They're stuck in the what if. And what if is one of the most mentally draining places to live. Because there's no resolution there. Just endless alternative timelines that only exist in their head. Each one a reminder that something meaningful slipped through their fingers. Reaching out feels heavier now than it ever did before. At first it felt like an option. Now it feels like a risk with consequences. What if you don't respond? What if you've moved on emotionally? What if they open the door only to realize it's already closed on your side? The fear isn't rejection alone. It's confirmation that the connection lives only in their head now. That the weight they've been carrying is one-sided. And so they hesitate. Again, they tell themselves they're being respectful, or rational, or mature, but deep down, they know it's fear. Fear of collapsing the fantasy they've been using to survive the uncertainty. Because as long as they don't reach out, anything is still possible. And possibility, even painful possibility, feels safer than finality. So instead, they escape inward. Their mind creates scenes that feel almost real, conversations that go perfectly, moments where everything is finally acknowledged, where tension dissolves and understanding replaces confusion. These imagined moments aren't about getting you back. They're about soothing the part of them that never felt heard, the part that never got closure, the part that still wants to believe the connection mattered as much as it felt. And while these scenarios offer temporary relief, they also deepen the attachment, because every time they imagine you, they reinforce your presence in their emotional world. You become a constant companion of their thoughts, even though you're not physically there. This is also where jealousy sharpens. Even if they don't call it that, they imagine someone else stepping into the space they once occupied, someone else getting your attention, your energy, your warmth, and it hurts in a quiet, humiliating way because they don't feel entitled to that pain anymore. They chose distance, or allowed it, or didn't fight hard enough against it. So they believe they forfeited the right to feel anything about your future. But emotions don't operate on logic or fairness. They show up anyway, and that contradiction creates internal shame. They feel ridiculous for caring, weak for feeling affected, and that self-judgment doesn't erase the jealousy. It just forces it underground, where it festers and grows. Eventually, thinking about you becomes part of their daily mental environment. Not dramatic, not overwhelming all the time, just constant, like background music they can't turn off. It plays during mundane tasks, during conversations with others, during moments of rest. Sometimes it's barely noticeable. Other times it's loud enough to demand attention, but it's always there. And that constancy is what wears them down, because there's no obvious solution, no clear next step, just an unresolved emotional presence that refuses to leave. And this is the truth. They're slowly circling around, whether they're ready to face it or not. This isn't happening because you're chasing them, or because you're trying to prove something, or because you're holding on. This is happening because you left an imprint. They didn't anticipate you mattered in a way that bypassed their defenses. You touched something they don't know how to name or release. And once that happens, distance doesn't erase it, silence doesn't weaken it. Time doesn't neutralize it. It just waits. It stays. It lingers until they're forced to acknowledge it. They can keep pretending it's nothing. They can keep distracting themselves. They can keep choosing silence. But none of that changes the underlying truth.